Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. Oh, hello. Welcome to episode 110 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. As always, I'm joined by Mary, a woman who knows more about giving the cold shoulder than about discussing Cold Harbor. I am merely a trampled headlog named Darren. Hello, Mary.
Trampled what?
Never mind. What's going on? How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh God, I'm telling you, I was doing good. It's doing fantastic. You're obviously right on your game as always, Mary. You're ready to go. It's your Friday night, and you're ready to roar and ready to go.
First time recording on a Friday night too.
That's very exciting. It's very exciting.
Yep.
So, we haven't done this in a couple weeks.
I know it's been. We took a few weeks off just because we've been busy and stuff, but we are back. And not to steal your thunder, so I will let you get back to your hosting duties.
Oh, okay. I'm happy to do that. I mentioned the thunder. I think the thunder about to get here a little bit. So I will ask you, because I'm a gracious host, Mary, what are you drinking on this fine evening, this Friday evening extravaganza?
I am drinking Resin. It's a double IPA by 6 Point Brewing out of Brooklyn, New York. It's very good.
Okay.
And what are you drinking? Oh, and I'm drinking out of my Unconditional Grant mug. And what are you drinking?
Oh, rusty.
Yeah, I know. It's been a few weeks. I'm very rusty.
I know. It's a 6 Point Stupor IPA. Apparently, it's the best you can do at the beer store. So that's what I'm drinking. And I am drinking likewise out of my U.S. Grant mug because although this isn't going to be a good day for old Ulysses here, this is going to be one that he's talked about quite a bit. So we can kind of get into this, Mary. I think, you've probably forgotten by now, but a few weeks ago we discussed the Battle of Spotsylvania.
Really?
And that brutal battle that was the early part of Ulysses S. Grant's overland campaign in the spring of 1864. Now, we're not going to go back and reinvent the wheel here, turn back time if you
No, I think it's important to mention, though, that this is there's simultaneous offensives that Grant has launched at the Confederacy. The overland campaign is just one of them. Sherman's Atlanta campaign is the other that's happening. And if you'll remember, a few weeks ago, we recorded an episode about Pickett's Mill as well. And there's stuff happening down in kind of in the Gulf area as well with, I think it's Nathaniel Banks and all that. So there's different things happening to try and bring an end to the Civil War. But the overland campaign is what Grant is currently involved in, and the Army of the Potomac, which the Army of the Potomac is led by General Meade.
Yeah, so it follows the Spotsylvania when it's a battle of wilderness at the old Chancellorsville battlefield, 1863, and then Spotsylvania comes along. But it really signified that sea change in that Union Army's philosophy that we talked about a couple episodes ago about how the philosophy changed a little bit, and it's going to really change with this battle we're going to talk about now. Mm-hmm. And again, unlike previous generals, Grant, he wouldn't fall back to lick his wounds. After he won or lost like previous Union generals are, before starting Confederate General Robert E. Lee's army in Northern Virginia, he was like the Terminator. He kept coming, and this is the thing that Lee realized too, is that unlike these previous generals, Grant's going to keep coming. He's not going to fall back and just give him time. And looking at the numbers, Grant knew that he had almost a 2-to-1 man advantage at the beginning of this overland campaign. And instead of trying to sack Richmond like his predecessors, like McClellan, we talked about the Peninsula campaign, he's gonna use that man advantage not to attack the capital, but he's going to try to use it to target and destroy Lee's army.
Well, that's what he told Meade to do, right? That's what he told Meade to do, was wherever Lee goes, there you will also go.
And that was the big game change, really, going back to early May of 1864. And Lee didn't realize it. He didn't realize the target was on his forehead instead of Richmond. And that's a big part of it. So without rehashing Spotsylvania all over again, Grant's philosophy is going to prove to be extremely costly. Now, when you factor in the Battle of the Wilderness, the battle after Spotsylvania, Grant suffered close to 40,000 casualties at this point. He started 125,000 men. He's already down. He's already lost 40.
He can get reinforcements much easier than what Lee can now. And what Grant said about this is, he said, "I determined first to use the greatest number of troops practicable against the armed force of the enemy, to hammer continuously against the armed force of the enemy and his resources, until by mere attrition, if no other way, there should be nothing left of him." And that's what he's doing. And that's That's not really what Sherman is doing. Sherman's sort of doing that in his Atlanta campaign, but not really. The attrition thing for Sherman really comes about with the march to the sea. So this is kind of Grant's overall, like, what he overall, I guess, philosophy is, like, we're going to do this by attrition. But this is essentially what he's doing in the Overland campaign as well, is just keep throwing the troops. And I think Grant full well knows that what the cost is going to be, and it's the lives of these men to bring an end to the Civil War.
Well, I mean, there's stories that Grant would go into his tent and openly weep when he got the casualty numbers of some of these battles. Now, Lee, just prior to the Wilderness, he had about 65,000 men, and after Spotsylvania, he lost about 20,000. So the war of attrition you mentioned for Grant is actually working at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But that butcher's bill is getting larger and larger and larger. So by May 26th, this is just after the Battle of North Anna. It's just 2 weeks after the beginning of the Overland campaign. Grant is losing an astonishing 2,000 men per day at this point. That's how many guys he's losing. And by that point, Lee realized he had to know that he's dealing with a different animal in this U.S. Grant.
Oh, yeah.
And he knows he's going to be relentless and he's going to be hunted down by Grant. And this is a different thing now. And Grant's philosophy mentioned that. It's also going to require Lee to change his philosophy. You know, he saw his numbers diminishing, that is of Robert E. Lee. Unlike his rival to the north that you mentioned a bit ago, Lee really had no opportunity to replace these men.
No, and sometimes it's not, the men are not necessarily being, a casualty of battle or of disease. They're also deserting at this time. Desertions in Army of Northern Virginia are happening. I mean, they're obviously happening in the Union too, but at this time, Army of Northern Virginia, they're definitely happening. And Lee cannot afford to lose men at this point because they don't have the way to reinforce that the Union Army does.
Right. And here's why that's important too, is because Lee no longer had the ability to control that initiative. He no longer had the ability to counterattack like he did at the Battle of Chancellorsville when he had lower numbers and he was able to counterattack to achieve success, probably because of Howard realistically, but that's the way it was. He doesn't, so he can't wait and just split his army up anymore and counterattack. So he doesn't have the ability to do that. And that's the big change for Lee's philosophy. Grant, though, was taking a beating and soon realized that he is going to need more men. He's losing guys 2,000 per day. He's going to win this war of attrition to do it, but he's losing more.
It's a very high cost to win a war of attrition.
He is. And the one thing Grant didn't have, though, was time.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have the luxury of finding recruits, training them, putting them through all the drills to get them ready and go fight. So he decided what he's going to do is he's going to go to the bullpen. He's going to go to the Army of the Potomac, and what he's going to ultimately end up doing is he's going to look at some of these heavy artillery infantry groups that are guarding the forts around Baltimore and around Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is risky because Abraham Lincoln, Mary, the guy with the hat we talk about from time to time, he desperately, if you remember, you probably forgot that too, wanted to protect the capital. It was a big deal for him. And so he's going to allow Grant to pull a handful of regiments that were previously being used to man and guard these forts. Now, these men were heavy artillery soldiers. They weren't new. They'd been in the Army a couple of years, but their jobs did not require, for the most part, that they attacked. Their jobs, for the most part, were to sit in forts with these big guns, do parades, and for the most part, sit around. And I don't want to say sit around, but they just guarded, and not a lot was going on.
But they need them. That's the thing. It's like the Confederates haven't threatened Washington yet. I mean, you flash forward to July of '64, and they're going to, but right now, I think Grant is kind of weighing the risks of what he needs to do. And it is risky to pull men from the forts, but you have to look at, okay, what's more? Like, if I don't, then I'm not going to have the men.
You got to do what you got to do. I mean, you have no alternative. So the heavy artillery regiments that Grant is going to pull to join the fight in Virginia is going to be the 2nd New York, the 7th New York, the 1st Massachusetts, and the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. Now, these men, like we said, they're not new, but they're basically like derided and teased by the other infantrymen. They're called paper collar soldiers. They're called bandbox soldiers, who sat behind fat walls and did parades and sat around. That's the reputation they have. We
Mhm.
talked a lot about these soldiers, regaining reputation. George Lamb Willard at Gettysburg, we talked a lot about. A.P. Hill coming out of Harper's Ferry for Antietam. There's a lot of cases throughout this,
Yeah.
and this is another one. These men and their leaders need to prove to the rest of the soldiers that they are legit soldiers.
Mhm.
But for Grant, like I said, this is risky. He's taking untested troops and putting them in a crucial spot to replace 40,000 lost battle-tested veterans in Virginia in the waning days of this war when Lee was a caged animal.
Yeah.
So it was a risky venture for Grant. Now, one of these regiments I mentioned, some of these though I mentioned, two of them are really going to stand out in this battle we're going to talk about, and that's going to be that we'll talk about. The first one we're going to talk about is the 2nd Connecticut, right?
Yeah.
To get into this. And real quick, tell them about their story. The 2nd Connecticut was formed in 1862, and they spent the war guarding forts in Washington. Their commander was a colonel named Elijah Strong Kellogg, and he's from Glastonbury, Connecticut. I think the traffic on I-95 probably made him a hardened and angry man.
God,
so he's probably
traffic.
the perfect guy for the job. Going about that, it's worse than Maryland traffic. Now, the thing about Kellogg, before the war, he was a sailor in the British merchant fleet, and he tried his luck hunting for gold in the California gold rush in 1849 when maybe old Uncle Blingy was out there with him. Mary.
Uncle
Who knows,
Blingy
right?
discovered the gold.
He was a big, red-faced, angry guy who bullied his men, but he earned their respect because how hard he drilled them. The movie Glory we talked about, the guy who plays Sergeant Major, he actually looks a lot like Kellogg if you look at his face.
Yeah.
It Camp Meigs. Physically, they look a lot alike, and they drilled very similarly.
I wonder if he was kind of based off of him, because that character was fictional, was he not?
He was sure it was fictional, but Kellogg wasn't an Irish like the movie. But if you look him up, he looks a lot like he's in the movie. The other regiment I wanted to talk about was the 8th New York Heavy Artillery, which is based in Niagara area of New York. They had guys from Batavia. We were there not too long ago. Lockport, and they are also formed in 1862. Now, these men are going to join. This 8th New York is actually going to join Grant right before the Battle of Spotsylvania. So they're there a little bit sooner than the 2nd Connecticut. And these guys, for the most part, guarded forts around Baltimore, Maryland. For the most part. Their commander was a guy named Colonel Peter Porter, and he was a Harvard man, Mary, from Harvard University up the street in Cambridge. Probably couldn't get into BC.
He looks like a Harvard man. I'm just looking at his picture right now.
Certainly was. But he was also a New York State senator, and so that's who he was. The men of the 8th New York Heavy Artillery absolutely adored Colonel Porter. They weren't happy guarding forts, and they knew Porter didn't like this paper collar soldier reputation they had. He wanted to get them out into fight. The men wanted to fight, and they loved him for it. And he was really pushing the envelope. Now, as I mentioned, Lee didn't have a bullpen to call on when he lost a soldier. He couldn't just go to the soldier store and go pick up new guys.
Yeah, the soldier store.
Lee knew as well as anyone the clock was running out on him because he knew at this point likely what Grant was doing, and he knew that it was finite. The time was running low, and the situation was dire. He had a real tough situation in Spotsylvania, and now he lost a lot of guys, and now he's losing more with no ability to replace them. Grant also knew this. He knew that mighty army of Northern Virginia was vulnerable, or as how he thought they were anyway, because this war of attrition was important to him. Besides those men, Lee was also losing a lot of his top officers. Don't just forget the soldiers. Obviously, Stonewall Jackson's gone.
Yeah.
James Longstreet got injured at the Wilderness, so he's going to be out a little while. Just 2 weeks before, on May 12th, he lost Jeb Stuart at Yellow Tavern.
Yep.
And throw in the fact that A.P. Hill is perma-sick at this point. He's always sick.
Isn't Ewell taken out too at some point, and Jubal Early takes over command too?
They're losing guys left and right in the soldier. But A.P. Hill, he's also lost his fastball a little bit too. He doesn't have that fire anymore. I mean, he's been sick for a while. And, all this is going to put Lee in a really, really bad spot. And it's going to put him in the spot that he doesn't like, and that is forcing him to react to what Grant does. He was a big seize the initiative guy, control the situation. Now he knew he had to react, and he knew he had to play defense.
Mm-hmm.
And he was hoping to force Grant into a quagmire, giggity, with all the hope that it would tire out the North, and maybe they would sustain so many losses the Copperheads would politically, they would just call an end to this.
Yeah.
That the blood was going to be so bad, they said, this is ridiculous, enough is enough. And that was kind of Lee's game plan.
Yeah.
It really was. And it's not a good game plan to have. He's lucky, though, that his men, the soldiers, still had piss and vinegar in their veins. They had fire in their bellies. They wanted to keep fighting. There was no lack of fighting spirit in the men of the Army of Northern Virginia.
No, there wasn't. There was, and same with Army of the Potomac. I mean, but both sides are getting worn down. Like Spotsylvania was a very horrific battle for both sides, and here they are having to kind of like do it again, or go into it. It's like they're just going to keep at them, and how much Grant and Meade and all, the Corps commanders are telling them what's going on. Like they might be kind of in the dark about some of it too, right? Like they might be like, what are we doing now?
Well, they certainly are. We're not going to talk a lot about the Battle of North Anna, which maybe another day, but just real quickly, it was a battle that Lee, it was heading into Cold Harbor. It was a battle that Lee had a chance to set a trap on Grant. And it was kind of his last real type of offensive. Communication got all screwed up and no one did what they were supposed to do, and it fell apart. Lee was also sick at this time. He had a little scarbutic situation. So
yes, I was reading about that in one of the books I read for this. He was like literally in bed and he's having to figure out what's going on.
Well, he couldn't ride Traveler. He was riding in a carriage.
Yeah.
He just couldn't do it. So he's down. He's ill as well. And Grant's strategy for the most part, all along was to get Lee in the open, try to get him to block Richmond to pull him out, and then go ahead and attack him. But again, Lee still thinks he's trying to take Richmond, and it's not. That's like I said, the target is right on Lee's forehead.
Yeah.
And to Lee's credit, for the most part, most of the fights on this Overland campaign were kind of stalemates. I mean, it's really a 2-to-1 man advantage all along. But Lee is going to pick the Wilderness, as a fighting ground. He's going to beat him at Spotsylvania. Yeah. So he's able to kind of keep him at bay. Even with the greater numbers, he's able to fight Lee pretty much mano a mano to a standstill.
Well, they have stuff going against them though too. Like there's like poor communication that's constantly happening. There's the weather, which we saw with Spotsylvania, which it turns out, the weather, as crappy as it was, like turns out to be an advantage for the Confederates because it completely messes the Union up in what they're trying to do, right? So there's lots of stuff going on too. And you see a parallel to that. You see it happening in the Atlanta campaign as well. Like communication and weather are two things that are really factoring in to what's happening in the Civil War at this time.
Yeah, and weather's going to play. We're going to play it. Weather's going to talk about this in a little bit. So May 28, 1864, Mary, U.S. Grant is going to cross a river called the Pamunkey River. Great name for a river, okay? And he's basically closing in on the James River, which is near Richmond. And the rebel capital is that vital railroad hub. It's obviously the capital of the Confederacy. Yeah. It's for Lee, it's the game. It's the lifeblood of everything. Now, Grant, for the most part, is tightening the vice and getting closer and closer to Richmond. Lee, again, running out of time. He doesn't have it. He's running out of time. And he also is losing room to maneuver. So as he's getting closer and closer to Richmond, he's limited to what he can do as far as logistically moving, things like that. Lee's going to write. He's going to write, we must destroy this army before it gets to the James. If it gets there, it'll become a siege, and then it'll be a matter of time.
Yeah.
So, like I said, the vice is closing. Grant on this day is less than 10 miles from Richmond, and Lee knew he had no choice but to fight Grant now and beat him. This was literally now or never for Lee, because if Grant beats him here, he's going to, in Lee's mind, he's going to go right through. Yeah. He's going to take Richmond, and that's going to be the end of the game. Grant is rubbing his hands together because he's thinking this is it. This is right now. This is end game. So to stop Grant, Lee is going to set up a 5-mile defense line running northwest to northeast of Richmond, which is going to guard the roads that are going into the rebel capital. Grant knew that if he could break this line, He'd have a clear path to Richmond, and he knew that Lee knew this. So when he knew Lee had to fight here.
Yeah.
So by going at these roads, he knew this was his chance again to bring Lee out and get him.
Mm-hmm.
Richmond, not who cares? It's Lee. But he knew that by where he was going, Lee had to fight him here. And so it was a perfect situation. And so with Lee out in the open, he had him. So Grant was as confident as Apollo Creed fighting Drago at this point.
God.
He just was. He's going to wire Washington. He's going to write, Lee's army is really whipped. Prisoners we take show it. I may be mistaken, but I feel our success over Lee's army is already assured. That's what he wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And history will prove soon later that Grant had chosen poorly with this situation. He did.
Poorly.
So let's kind of go into this a little bit. May 30th, 1864, the Army of the Potomac, still under George Meade. You mentioned that a little while ago. Good way to bring that up, Mary. But it's still under the overall command of Grant.
Mm-hmm.
They're marching along the Virginia countryside in the woods. And to your point with the weather, it is extremely hot. It is oppressive as Virginia tends to be in late May.
It's very like it had been really dry leading up to that. But as we saw in Spotsylvania, like the rain, and when it rains for days at a time. But it's very hot, like humid, just gross weather.
Yeah, if everyone's been in Virginia in late spring, early summer, it's just hot, oppressive. It was in the high 90s around this time. It was just hot. It was dusty. And these men had to march along these dusty, hot roads, wearing the wool, carrying all their gear. And they've been fighting now for weeks almost straight. So you can see the tires on their mental,
they're wearing down. Yeah, they're wearing down.
Now, many of these men recognize the landscape because they fought on the same ground during the 7 Days battles a couple years before.
Yeah.
And so their objective for the most part was to seize the roads leading into Richmond. And there was, just like Spotsylvania, there was a little crossroads where all the roads converged. They wanted to get that crossroads. The crossroads was near a small tavern called Cold Harbor. And despite the name, it was not cold, nor was it a harbor. It got that name because it was a safe harbor for travelers looking for a place to stay. And it was called Cold because they didn't serve hot food or they didn't serve food at all. So that's how you get the name Cold Harbor. So the calendar's going to flip to June 1st of 1864, Mary. The Union forces will control this Cold Harbor crossroads under the cavalry force of guess who?
Phil Sheridan.
Phil Sheridan. All Phil's back from his adventure with Yellow Tavern. He's back. So Sheridan is gonna basically be basking in the glow of killing Jeb Stuart a few weeks prior, despite the fact that he robbed the Federals of cavalry.
Yeah, and maybe it wasn't as big of a deal as what they thought. And I mean, he's got 3 different guys with him. He's got General Alfred T. A. Torbert, General D.M.G. Gregg, or Run DMG as you call him, and then General James H. Wilson. Those are the 3 guys that Sheridan has with him at this time. And he's at the crossroads. And, Meade has basically told him you need to hold them Grant tells him you need to hold them, secure it at all hazards. And this is the thing, like, I don't think Sheridan is taking orders from Meade anymore at this point. Like, it's always like
that ship has sailed.
That ship sailed a long time ago. They did not get along at all. And I mean, quite frankly, I don't blame them. Blame Meade because I cannot stand Phil Sheridan. But, so you see these orders coming down. They're always from Grant. So Sheridan's kind of like this, like, is he independent from the Army of the Potomac and taking orders from Grant? Who knows? It's just kind of a weird situation.
Well, regardless, he's there. He's holding it. Lee is actually going to try to attack him because he's going to realize it's cavalry. And he actually is going to have some success on Sheridan. But what's going to happen is the Union's going to get infantry support. And this is going to be the 6th Corps that's going to come in and they're going to push the Rebs back. This infantry will be under Horatio Wright. We mentioned the 6th Corps. These are hardened veterans. These are guys who've been fighting. They've been fighting for a while.
These are Sedgwick's guys, because remember, Sedgwick hasn't even been gone for that long yet. And Horatio Wright was the one that took over for him.
And Wright was right in the fire, and frying pan of the fire in Spotsylvania, and, for the most part. So among these troops in the 6th Corps, these hardened vets, is going to be that paper collar Heavy Artillery Regiment under Elijah Kellogg, that's
Hmm.
2nd Connecticut. And Kellogg, again, wanted to fight. He drove his men very hard to get to the battlefield. And like I mentioned, these guys have never seen combat before. And so their baptism under fire is going to be proved to be a bad one, right? So they're going to be up there with the Sixth Corps on the field now.
Hmm.
George Meade is going to draw up a battle plan to attack Lee. Now, Lee, remember, is in that 5-mile defensive line.
Yeah.
He's got a good position, but he's got no reserves. He's got one line, and that's all he's got. That's all she wrote. They are entrenched, and they are building extensive breastworks along that line. So by 4:30 p.m. on the afternoon of the 1st of June, 2 years to the day, by the way, that Robert Lee took command,
Yeah.
not far away after the Battle of
Close
Seven
to the
Pines,
anniversary of
right?
Howard losing his arm.
Right, exactly. Meade is going to order the first assault on these rebel lines, which will begin what will be known as the Battle of Cold Harbor.
Hmm.
Now, chosen is one of the, and this is the thing that's amazing. You know who they chose, one of the regiments to lead the attack? Was the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. That green group have never seen the elephant under Kellogg. He's going to be one of the first ones to go in. These untested troops, they're going to be placed in the 2nd Brigade under Emory Upton, who's in David Russell's 1st Division of the 6th Corps. He's got a good brigade commander.
Yeah.
Some of the soldiers commented how bright and crisp the blue uniforms were compared to the faded ones that the vets had, because these guys are right out of the wrapper. That's how new they were.
Yeah, that would be, I mean, God, I would not want to be in their position.
So Colonel Kellogg, upon getting the game plan, he's going to find out his men are going to be right at the vanguard, right at the point when this thing attacks. He meticulously is going to go over his plan with his staff. And he impressed on them very much that what he wanted is he wanted to know his men, they weren't these fake soldiers they've been hearing about. They wanted to prove themselves, that they weren't the people who are going to sit on their asses around forts all the time. He wanted to know, he wanted to get them out. He wanted to show the rest of the army that his men were equals to them. It was a big deal to Kellogg. So Captain Theodore Vail, he's going to be on Kellogg's staff. He's going to write down what Kellogg said to his men right before they went in. And he's going to write, "Now, men, go in steady, keep cool, keep still until I order you to charge, then go in with a yell. Not a man will fire a shot until we are within the enemy's breastworks. I shall be with you." So what's he saying? We're going in, and don't shoot until you get there.
Yep.
So, okay. So joining Kellogg's 2nd Connecticut is going to be many battle-tested regiments that we talked about. The 5th Maine, 121st New York, they fought at Gettysburg. The 95th Pennsylvania Zouaves, they're from Philly. They fought Wheat's Battalion there in those 7-day battles nearby. So they are with real, legit, battle-tested guys. This is going to be Kellogg's first battle, which is remarkable, which is kind of like being thrown in the ocean to be taught how to swim.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of what this is going to be against, like I said, those entrenched veterans of Robert E. Lee, less than 10 miles from the capital when they're at their most desperate.
Yeah.
So the time is going to come, and Kellogg is going to give his men some last-minute orders, last-minute things. He puts his hat on his sword, like Armistead at Gettysburg.
Yeah,
right?
it's like Armistead.
Hat on his sword. He's going to hold it over his head, and he's going to charge his men forward, and they're going to leave those breastworks, and they're going to move towards that rebel line with 12,000 other men from the 6th Corps. They're all going in. Now, when they approach the rebel line, men from Richard Anderson's Corps, the Confederates, right, the ones who took over for Longstreet, they are going to be just south. They're going to be lined up. This is all taking place just south of the old Gaines Mill battlefields, which we were not too long ago. It's kind of the same area, right? So in their front is going to be the brigade of Thomas Lanier Klingman. He's a North Carolina guy from Robert Hoke's division.
Yep.
They're going to have the 8th, the 31st, the 51st, and 61st North Carolina. And again, they're going to be entrenched behind earthworks, and they're going to be sitting there waiting for these Union guys to come. And what's going to happen is, once they get within range, the Carolinians are going to open fire. And guess what's going to happen in the 2nd Connecticut?
They get decimated.
They're going to get cut to ribbons. They're going to be shredded. Kellogg is going to try to rally his men, and he knew it was a waste of time. They were beaten badly in a very short amount of time. We're talking minutes, right? And despite that, what's amazing about this is despite that, they got within 10 yards of the rebel
Yeah, they got
breastworks. That's
close.
how that, and it got to a point. There's a really cool story about this. I mentioned Klingman, right? The Rebel Commander Klingman. He's going to write later that he remembers seeing Kellogg trying to rally his men just a few yards away. So basically, they're right. So Klingman's behind the Rebel breastworks. Kellogg is right in front of the
Hmm.
breastworks, leading his men. Kellogg is going to be standing there waving his sword, trying to rally his men. And Klingman's going to write about this. He's going to write a tall and uncommonly fine looking officer in the front rank of the enemy's column was looking at me directly in the face and took off his cap and cheered his men with words I could not hear. So what happens when Klingman's eyes and Kellogg's eyes, they literally met at that very moment. Klingon says he saw two bullets blow his head off while he's looking right at him.
Oh my God.
And then he went down. Captain Theodore Vale, the guy I quoted a little while ago, who's on Kellogg's staff, he wrote of this moment. The men staggered in every direction, some falling on the very top of the rebel parapet. So what are they saying? They're right on the breastworks.
Yeah, they're right there.
But what happens a lot is when you lose your commander, things change, right?
Yeah.
The men of the 2nd Connecticut, seeing that Kellogg is now fallen, they begin to fall and run back towards the Union breastworks. It turns into the old Howard 10K. They're going to take off, right? And as they're running back, they're going to run by their brigade commander. I mentioned who that was before. Remember who it was?
That was
It was Emory Upton.
Yeah, I was just gonna say
So Emory,
Upton was like,
so Upton is going to see these Connecticut men running, and he's going to start. He's going to try to rally them. There's one point where Upton himself stops them, and he basically says, "You know what? Stand here. Give me a musket." So he starts getting muskets loaded, and he starts shooting at the Rebs. And then there's passing him muskets, and he's shooting, grab another one,
yeah,
and that's what Upton is doing. And he's firing, and Upton's yelling at his men, "Men of Connecticut, stand by me. We must hold this line."
yeah,
So he takes that personal leadership at this situation. Upton does. All the Connecticut guys stop running, and they basically, you know what they do? They hold the line.
yeah,
So the Rebs aren't able to get past them. So the more experienced Sixth Corps up and down the line, they took a similar beating under brigades by guys like Alfred Colquitt,
yeah,
Johnson Haygood, James Martin. So this assault is repeating itself up and down the line with similar results. William Penrose's New Jersey Brigade, Henry Eustis's men, Nelson Cross's Pennsylvania, New York men, they're hitting this wall and getting driven back just as fast. And it's because of those defenses, those breastworks the Confederates have. So as darkness falls, the Rebs are going to have to fall back to their line. So they're not able to pursue. Again, they don't have any more reserves. They can't counterattack. They have to fall back to their lines. And in this assault, that 2nd Connecticut, they lose 386 men in just within minutes.
yeah.
And they said those crisp new blue uniforms were riddled with holes and covered with blood. That's what they said about them.
Yeah, Upton described the battle as a sheet of flame, sudden as lightning, red as blood, and so near that it seemed to singe the men's faces. So it was very, again, the fighting here, you know, whether you're looking at Spotsylvania or you're looking at Cold Harbor, it's very horrific. It's, you know, and at some points during this battle, I'm sure we'll talk about this, they do divulge again into hand-to-hand combat, right? But like, you know, this first day is like just, it's again, very, very horrific fighting. And, you know, it's been the lead up to it as well. Like, it's been marred by poor communication. You know, people are late getting to where they need to be in the battle. You know, the beginning is actually delayed because of that, you know.
Well, right. So that's going to be coming. So while this is going on back at the headquarters, U.S. Grant, and that famous picture with Matthew Brady was leaning up against the tree.
Yep.
That's the headquarters where he is, and this is all going on. So that's that picture gets taken. And actually, it's on June 12th the picture gets taken. But U.S. Grant has heard what happened. He heard they got repulsed pretty quickly, but he's still confident. He's like, okay, well, I mean, he's been through Shiloh. He's not the type of guy who's going to quit on day one.
No, he's seen a lot of stuff. He's been through a lot, and he's learned as he goes too.
In this first assault, he's lost 2,400 men. and the Rebs have only lost 1,000. So
Mhm.
again, those numbers aren't working out too well. But Grant, for whatever reason, he felt that another frontal attack on these rebel breastworks would break the line. And the reason for this confidence is going to be that anticipated arrival of the Second Corps of Winfield Scott Hancock.
Yep.
Old Winnie Boy's coming again.
He's coming
And
again.
so he knows he's got these guys coming, these battle-tested Second Corps guys under Hancock, was as tough as iron, right? During the night of June 1st, this is after that first assault. The shots are going to slow down. They're going to stop for the most part. Hancock, he's on the far Union right.
Mhm.
Well, not the very end, but he's on the
Yep.
right. So just like Spotsylvania, him and his men have got to make another march
At
behind the
night.
entire at
Yep.
night behind the lines because he's going to get to the left of Horatio Wright. So he's going to have to do another fun run through the woods. But the weather is an issue for this time. It's not going to be rain, it's going to be heat. And this
Yeah.
is going to be a big deal. That even at nighttime, the heat is so bad, the humidity is so bad that the men are falling. I mean, so basically, just you're going that they're talking about the fact that the soldiers they just couldn't really walk
Yep.
that far. There was stories where the horses who were carrying the artillery and the wagons were dying in the middle of the road.
Yep.
And they had to move them all. It was late at night, so all the DQs were closed. So there's nothing they could do
No
about
blizzards.
that. No chance with that. But he's going to have to walk all the way around that Union line again and set up with his divisions again of John Gibbon, Francis Barlow, and David Bell Birney, who's
Yep.
going to kind of be in reserve, but they're going to set up down there. So they do finally get there. The Sixth Corps is going to be set up with the division of David Russell with James Ricketts and Thomas Neal to the left of Baldy Smith's 18th Corps,
Yep.
who's going to be attacking Richard Anderson's corps just to the east of the old Gaines Mill battlefield again, like they had earlier that day. So it's all going to kind of take place just south of the old battlefield. Now, Hancock was expected to make this march all night to be ready for an attack the next morning at dawn.
Not going to happen.
And the weather was so hot, it just wasn't possible.
And
so
they also
men-
got lost too when they were
They
going.
they get lost. It was hot. It was miserable. The men are bitching. They're complaining. Like I said, the horses are dying. Their pets' heads are falling off. The whole deal, right? So they're finally going to get there. And it must have felt like deja vu from Spotsylvania for some of these guys.
Oh, that's exactly what I was
just must
thinking.
have
It's
been.
like, here we go again. Like, what are we going into?
So by the time they get there, it's late or it's early on the 2nd of June. And they're just exhausted. So Grant says, you know what? We're going to take a time out. We're going to delay this till the next day.
Mhm.
So instead of fighting on dawn on June 2nd, it's going to be dawn on June 3rd.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing, though, Mary. This plays right into Lee's hands.
Exactly.
Because what does Lee do now? Lee now has he's ended up with 36 hours to strengthen those breastworks. Now, those breastworks, what he took them, what they basically did was they dug 4 feet in the ground
Yep.
to make trenches. And then they put headlogs on top with that little spot that you can put your rifle through so you can shoot. Most of the injuries that took place in the Confederates were on the neck and the head because that's the only spot they could be seen.
Yeah.
The ones that they did get injured. But they turned those earthworks into Gibraltar.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
you know,
pretty impressive
and-
what they do, and like Lee just takes advantage of that. Like he figures out that the Second Corps and the Union Army is on the move, and he's gonna have his troops construct very impressive and intricate series of entrenchments, and this reinforces his position in an area that is heavily wooded. It's very uneven terrain, so it's bad enough to fight on anyway. But what you're seeing here is this has been a pattern in the Overland campaign, and it is the entrenchments, the digging in, and that's what they've basically been doing. The armies, both sides, would get to a place and they would start digging in. And it's a pattern not just in the Eastern Theater, but it's in the Western Theater as well. But the way it evolves in the Eastern Theater is into this trench warfare as well, which is this is
Right.
the beginnings of it.
It is. I mean, that old Jomini style where Dennis Mahan taught a lot of these guys about the Napoleonic style. They realized that wasn't going to work. But those breastworks, they were so good. If you go back to Gold Harbor today, you can still see how tall they were.
Yeah.
These breastworks, they were real and they were spectacular.
Ooh.
And that's just how good they were. But you can see how strong. If you go there, you can still see it today. a lot of Cold Harbor battlefield is gone, unfortunately, but you can still see the entrenchments,
Yeah,
and
there's a
they're
little bit
impressive.
of it. It's worth visiting. And the other thing that Lee does too is that he ends up moving Breckenridge as well, because he's like, well, Hancock's moving, you may as well move too. So this means that, when Hancock gets to where he needs to be, he's going to be facing Breckenridge again, which is kind of funny. And when Breckenridge moves, he manages to drive a small Union force off this place called Turkey Hill, which dominates a southern part of the battlefield.
Yeah, you're going to have. We'll talk about the lines. You're going to have, Cadmus Wilcox is going to be down in the south. Breckenridge. It'll continue north to get to Kershaw, and it's just going to go right up the line. Now, the night of June 2nd, it did rain, and it
Yep.
did break the heat down a little bit, and the troops slept in the pouring rain that night. And they if you read a lot of the stories in the diaries, they talk about that anticipation, right? They knew the next day was going to be pure hell. They
Mm-hmm.
both sides knew it, but the rain fell. Many of the Union men spent sleepless nights just sewing. They talk about sewing their names into their uniforms,
Yeah,
so after they were killed,
because
they they
they had this kind of, it was probably like you said, a sense of deja vu. And the one reason for this too is that the Union troops don't know the details of their objectives on the eve of the battle at all. And this is because Meade and Grant have not been communicating. They've kind of said, well, we'll let the corps commanders figure out how they want to attack, kind of thing. And it's really, I mean, for the infantry, like for the soldiers, that's got to be a terrible feeling. It's like you don't know what you're doing, and
it wasn't no.
they've already been through something like this before at
So
Spotsylvania.
just imagine they're sitting there sewing their names in. They talk about how they were writing letters home goodbye to their family. They were writing things like, I when I died, I was thinking of you facing the enemy. They were
Yeah.
writing letters like it had already happened. That's how it was. One of the regiments that again is going to be in the lead on the June 3rd attack is the other one I mentioned. This is the 8th New York Heavy Artillery. And this is that other regiment of paper
Mm-hmm.
collars, the ones from Niagara and Batavia, and that area
Mm-hmm.
of New York. Like I said a while ago, they were in charge for the most part of guarding Baltimore forts. So just like the Second Connecticut, now it's the 8th New York is going to be at this right at the edge of the sword here. They're going to be one of the ones leading it. Commanding the 8th New York Heavy Artillery is Colonel Peter Augustus Porter.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about him briefly a little while ago.
Yep.
The Harvard guy we talked about, 1857. He was a poet, wrote a lot of poems. He joined the war initially with the 129th New York after Fort Sumter. Very patriotic fella, and he
Mm-hmm.
wanted to fight. He wanted his men to fight. And that was a big deal for Porter. He eventually gained command of the 8th New York Heavy Artillery, where for the most part, just like I said, they did parades, they guarded the fort, but he was bouncing off the walls. He
Yeah.
just was. He wanted to do more. So he's going to end up getting moved out with these men from
Yeah.
Grant. Now joining the 8th New York, they're going to be in Nelson Miles Brigade, speaking of Spotsylvania, and they're going to be in Francis Barlow's division.
Yep.
With the 26th Michigan, 5th New Hampshire, 81st, 140th, and 130th, 183rd PA. That's who they're going to be with, as well as the 61st New York. These are all battle-tested veterans.
Mhm.
Again, you're going to have these heavy artillery, the 8th New York, these green fighting men with these heavy iron brigade-ish type guys.
Yeah.
Not, of course, the Little Iron Brigade, but
Yeah.
that's who they were. So late on June 2nd, Colonel Porter, they're sitting in the rain. He's going to be with a major named James Willett. And they're going to be sitting in a tree near the home of a woman named Margaret and Miles Gathright. And they're just sitting there, just hanging out. And Willett wrote down the moment. He just wrote it down. He says, Colonel Porter was vigilant. I don't think he slept at all. We sat down on a log to drink our coffee. He smiled and said some kind words. He got up. He stretched out his hand with sorrow on his face and said, goodbye, Major, and then walked away.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll prove to be, prophetic. But
Yeah.
June 3rd, 1864, dawn's going to arrive.
Yeah.
It's going to be a gray, misty morning,
Foggy.
just a typical morning.
It's
right?
very
The ones
much
we've been
like what it
talking
was
about.
like, I think, when Barlow was advancing at Spotsylvania. It's the same thing. And there's going to be 3 Union Corps that they begin to advance through this thick fog. Again, just like at Spotsylvania, they can't see very far in front of them. And the Confederates know they're there.
Well, that's the thing you just mentioned that's important to know is that, Meade, he actually ordered the rebel position to be reconnoitered the night before.
They
And
didn't
guess
do it.
what? Didn't do it.
They didn't do
And
it.
so And so when they start moving forward, they literally are marching blind. They
Hmm.
really are. They know the rebels are out there, but they don't know where they are and how many they are. They get an idea that they're entrenched. They don't know how bad they're entrenched, but they're blind. Major James Willett again. He writes again. I saw Colonel Porter appear at the top of our works. This is right before they went to go. As the colonel waved his sword, the line advanced into that terrible fire. He yelled, "Come on, New York," and the men went.
Yep.
Now, the thing about this, almost immediately, as soon as they left their breastworks, they were fell under fire. And again,
Yep.
these were fighting against Cadmus Wilcox's guys.
It
Um,
yeah, it's very
so
massive fire, and like what happens, it causes heavy casualties. The survivors are all pinned down, and it's going to be like this repulse that's happening here is going to be one of the most lopsided casualties since Mary's Heights at Fredericksburg in 1862.
right. These guys were literally marching into a buzzsaw, is
Yep.
what they were doing. After the Battle of Vander Law, Gettysburg, he commanded a brigade of Alabamans in Anderson's corps, and he said that the carnage of this assault was the worst he'd ever seen. He said it wasn't war, it was murder.
Hmm.
That's how one side this was. 2,000 men under Francis Channing Barlow are going to engage in hand-to-hand combat. You hinted at that earlier, against Wilcox's men in the south part of the battlefield.
Yeah,
This is going to be the only successful part for the Union because Barlow's men are actually going to capture a couple hundred Rebs
they do.
at this part of the battlefield, but they're going to end up getting knocked off. They're going to
It
get
become
repulsed. They're going to get pushed back.
Yeah, what happens is that the Confederates end up turning. So their Barlow's guys get into the entrenchments and they get into the trenches and all that. And what happens is the Confederates end up turning their guns on the trenches that they built, and it becomes just like a death trap for them.
Yeah.
And you have to remember there's survivors pinned down too from the first assault. But the one thing that they manage to do is they do, as you said, they take several hundred prisoners, but they also do capture 4 guns as well.
So that's the positive. William C. Oates, from Lower Round Top, he's now commanding the 48th Alabama
Hmm.
because he got screwed out of the 15th Alabama politically. He lost. It's a long story, but he's now commanding the 48th Alabama. He's going to write about this. The fire was terrific for my regiment. I could see dust fall out of men's clothing at 3 places at once because you see about the bullets. That's what he's talking about. And another issue the feds had with this whole thing was the command and control. The whole thing was a mess. Like the Rebs at Shiloh, the regiments, as they're going forward, they start to get mixed up and they start to get confused. So it's a big hodgepodge of guys. So you're fighting with your regiment, but you start moving forward, and you didn't have to move that forward because you're under fire immediately.
Yep.
Suddenly, you're not with your guys anymore.
Yeah.
It's a complete disaster.
And it's like, who do you take orders from? And then, Hancock is advancing his different division commanders. So Barlow's obviously gone, and the next one to go in is John Gibbon, and his troops. As you said, it's so disorganized. They get into a swampy area. They can't advance, and there's this heavy fire coming at them. And one of Gibbon's men said, "We felt it was murder, not war, or at best a very serious mistake had been made." So this is coming from the top down. This is from Grant and Meade, not clearly telling them what was going on, what was going to happen.
And this was going on up and down the line. Way to
Yeah.
the north, the far right of the Union line is Baldy Smith's 18th Corps. And there's a really cool story about the flag bearer that takes place around this point.
Hmm.
So this flag bearer in the 18th Corps under Baldy Smith, he's basically leading his company forward, just trying to walk with the flag. The entire company behind him is shot down or runs or they're gone. The flag bearer doesn't know he's literally by himself. There's
Yeah.
nobody else but him. He's walking with the flag towards the Confederate line with the understanding he's got a company behind him he's leading, but he's literally by himself. He's going to be attacking the line of Alabamans, or not attacking, he's marching towards them. The Alabamans, they see he's by himself. So they don't start firing on him. They start yelling to him, "Turn around, get back, go back. What are you doing?" The kid keeps marching. And finally, the guys are yelling, "Go, go, go." And the officers are saying, do not shoot that man. Do not shoot him. And finally, he stops. And he kind of peers over his shoulder, and he has that pucker effect moment.
Yeah, he's like,
oh
shit, I'm by myself.
And so, but he doesn't run. You know what he does? He stops, he puts the flag on the ground, he salutes the Confederates, and he turns and about faces and walks away. and the Alabamans start going crazy cheering. Yeah,
Wow, that is such a
because they
good
think it's
story.
and they think it's and so he walks away off and he's not harmed. It's just one of those cool stories that takes place in the
Yeah.
Civil War. And it's out of all the stories, it has that human element to this
Oh
that
yeah.
we'll get to here in a little bit. But meanwhile, going back to the other side of the line, Porter's 8th New York,
Yeah.
they're going to get within 20 feet of the
Hmm.
rebel breastworks at this point. Now, again, these are green soldiers, so it's remarkable they were able to get that
Well,
close,
again, it
even
probably
though,
goes back to just that whole like their attitude towards it is we have something to prove to ourselves, to
yeah,
not just ourselves but to everybody else, because we've been ridiculed since we got here.
oh.
So that probably factors into how they're fighting as well.
Well, the flag bearer down with the 8th New York Heavy Artillery, he got the bum stick because he did not have the luck that the other flag bearer did in Barley
Hmm.
Smith, because this specific one got shot down pretty quick. And who picks up the colors is Colonel Porter himself. He picks up the flag.
Yeah.
He's going to take his sword in one hand. He's going to grab the flag in the other, and he's going to raise them both and start walking towards the rebel line. It's a suicide mission. I mean,
Yeah.
it just is. And Private William Murphy, one of his men in the 8th New York, he's going to write about what happened to him. He writes, Colonel Porter, at the head of the regiment, was shot through the throat. He struggled only to be felled again. He fell to his knees and gasped his last orders to his men. He yelled, "On the colors." He was then shot 6 more
Yeah.
times while he was on his knees and then died. Now, this is right in front of this. They, again, go back to the beginning of this. They loved this guy.
Yeah.
This guy. He was a ice cold can of IPA for you. That's how
Ooh.
much they love this guy, right? And seeing him fall must have been
Yeah.
tragic for his men. The 8th New York Heavy Artillery will lose 505 men in minutes. Okay, this is 33% of their numbers, and up and down that Union line, the results were similar. The survivors, you kind of hinted at a little bit ago, they dropped to the ground, were pinned to the ground, they couldn't move.
Yeah.
So standing up, because you had sharpshooters, you had regular infantry guys, even poking your head up was instant death. So they had to
Yeah.
pin down. A lot of the guys used cups or bayonets to dig into
Yeah,
the ground, burrow like animals.
Yeah, they start digging in it. It's terrible fighting, and even like, right in with the Sixth Corps, they end up getting pinned down by heavy fire too, and they can't advance. And even Emory Upton, who this is the guy that was like did that charge, Battle of Spotsylvania and all that. He didn't think advancing was a good idea and deemed it impracticable to advance.
I mean, we'll talk about that going here in a minute, but there's a lot of that. But these men, for the most part, are pinned down. Now, according to the Ken Burns documentary, they said that the Union Army lost 7,000 men in the first 15 minutes, and that's just not true. That's an exaggeration. They only lost 4,000 the entire day, so they didn't lose 7,000 the first 15 minutes. It's just that's a misconception and an overestimation, but that doesn't change the fact this is pure carnage, because it was. The morning assault on June 3rd of 1864 was a complete disaster.
Mm-hmm.
When Lee found out about it, he couldn't believe it.
No,
because he lost his 1,500 men. He didn't even know. I mean, again, he had no resources. He didn't even know this happened until afterwards. So you have one of the more bloody, one-sided fights in this war. Neither general's on the field. They're both back at their headquarters.
Yeah.
Now, back in the rear, in the Savannah, Mary, George Meade probably doesn't know the severity of the slaughter. He probably doesn't know how bad it is, because it happened so quickly.
Yeah.
And in just 30 minutes, it was pretty much fait accompli. He's going to order his generals again to renew the attack. And Winfield Scott Hancock, okay, he's a very opinionated fellow, Mary. I don't know if you know this. He was. Along with some of his other corps commanders, they just ignored Meade's orders.
Yep.
They didn't take him seriously. They saw the absolute hopelessness of any future attack against this defended position. Hancock's going to tell Meade that the battle's over, man. It's over, Johnny. Baldy Smith openly refused the order.
He said it was a wanton waste of life.
He's like, I'm not obeying this. Colonel Thomas Barker, he's a commander of the 12th New Hampshire under Griffin Stedman. This is back in John Martindale's division up in Baldy Smith's up in the 18th. Mm-hmm. He's going to write after the battle, I would not take my regiment on another such charge if Jesus Christ himself ordered it. He's
Gosh.
like, nope, we ain't doing it. And so that's what the reality of this whole thing was. They're saying, nope, 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 nope. Now, once the shooting stopped, both the Union men and the Confederates, they basically stayed in position where they were.
Hmm.
And the thing about it, though, is in between the lines, it was no man's land. It
Yeah.
was dead and dying blue uniforms everywhere, as men digging into the ground. They were just stuck there. So for the rest of the day on June 3rd and into the night, the Union troops are going to have to listen to the moaning of the dying soldiers, begging for help and water all night long. And they couldn't move because they moved, they were going to get shot. They were stuck.
Yeah.
One Union soldier wrote, "This is truly the valley of the shadow of death." That's what they're seeing, and that's what they're experiencing.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's in Grant, he said that the opinion of the corps commanders not being sanguine of success in case an assault is ordered, you may direct a suspension of further advance for the present. So he just issues this order that says no more.
And Lee's kind of stuck too, because like I said earlier, he has no men to counterattack. He lost the ability to seize the initiative because he doesn't have his men anymore. So all night long on June 3rd, the Feds, they're digging in position. They're preparing their trenches for that inevitable Confederate counterattack that's never going to come. So from June 4th, the next morning, till June 7th, the men, for the most part, remain pinned in their breastworks under that hot Virginia sun, under that 90-degree heat, and the men are hiding from rebel sharpshooters. And anytime they move, there's pot shots being fired. They're just stuck.
Now, they lose so many men in those days too, and the Union artillery are bombarding the Confederates, and the Confederates respond by sending shells over the Union position, and that's why the casualty figures from June 4th to 12th were twice as much as the June 3rd assault, even though there's no large-scale attacks, because they're just using artillery.
Well, and they're just sitting there staring at each other. I mean, during the night of June 5th, during the night of June 5th, some of the men of the 8th New York, they were stuck where they were. They've been there since the 3rd. They were, for the most part, staring at the dead body of their colonel, Peter Porter, right in front of them. And they just couldn't stand it. He's sitting there rotting in the fields, and they just couldn't stand it. So they wanted to retrieve his body and pull it back behind the line. So 5 of the men are going to volunteer to risk their lives to get the body of their commander, Colonel Porter, back to the Union line. One guy's name is Sergeant Leroy Williams. He's going to volunteer to crawl out under the cover of darkness and get him. And so again, you got sharpshooters shooting at anything that moved, right? Sergeant Williams, what he's going to do, he's going to tie a rope. He's going to get there. He's going to tie a rope around Porter's waist. And then he's going to play dead for a few hours till the Confederates move. So he lays out there next to his commander. And the rebel soldiers are going to move out of the area from right where they were. And then once he's gone, the other 4 guys are going to basically pull the rope and pull Porter back, his dead body back. And they're going to get the body back. For this, Sergeant Leroy Williams is going to be awarded the Medal of Honor for this.
Yeah, I was reading that about him.
One of 10 men to receive the award of the Battle of Cold Harbor. So again, this is the amount of bravery from a green, untested battle guy, what these guys did. By June 7th, they're still there. The stench of the dead was overwhelming. Yeah. You just imagine, right? And Grant is going to message Lee at this point.
He's been reluctant to ask for a formal truce to recover the bodies.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Grant says, "Can we just take a quick time out? Let us get the bodies." And Lee says, "Nope." He goes, "I want a formal truce to do this." And Grant is going to say, "The hell, the F you are." Yeah. Because if he doesn't want to admit defeat, because you do that, you're admitting you lost.
Yeah.
So it's not going to happen. Grant is going to finally come around and say, "Oh God, fine."
2 hours cessation of hostilities.
He's going to do it, and they're going to call a break. And then what's going to happen is one of those cool stories that you see a lot in the Civil War in these battles, like Kennesaw, things like that. They're going to call the truce, and the Union and the federal troops and the Confederate troops are going to come out, and they're going to start to hang out with each other. how's your family? How's it going? Where
Yep.
you're from? What regiment you're from? They're going to trade tobacco. They're going to do this and that. Trade DQ cards. The whole deal.
DQ card.
But they're gonna sit down for a couple hours. And they're going to talk about it. And for that short period of time, these combatants are going to be Americans again, and they're just going to talk about it. They're going to be back to the way it was for a
It's
short
like what
period of
happens
time.
in a few weeks, at Kennesaw Mountain. A few weeks later, the
Right,
same thing
exactly.
happens.
Yeah. So one Georgian, he's going to write about this. He's going to say, "We met and talked with them as if they were old friends," and that's what it was. A couple hours later, the truth is going to end. All the bodies are going to get recovered, and the men are going to return to their breastworks, and then they
Mhm.
remain there for the next 5 days. And you mentioned before they're going to fire back and forth,
Yep.
artillery stuff. There's going to be no battles, but they're going to be losing men. This trench warfare you mentioned at the beginning of this, this was the real sea change in the Civil War
Yeah.
that really takes place here. And never again will soldiers fight linear formation in the American Civil War. The era of modern war begins really at Cold Harbor.
Yeah.
So going forward, like you said a while ago, when these armies got together, they entrenched, they dug in, and they fought from behind earthworks. So the day the Dennis Mahan, Jomini, that's all
Yeah.
over.
What these guys,
Yeah.
but it's funny, it's what all these guys, what Grant, what Sherman, what Lee, what Beauregard, just any general that went to West Point was taught that style of warfare. And some of them, like Beauregard, had a tough time breaking away from that. If it wasn't in a textbook, they didn't, they're like, how do I do this? But, Lee and Grant are having to, and Sherman too, out in the Western theater, like the warfare's starting to change, and it happens in Eastern and Western theater, but I think Eastern theater is where you see the more the trenches that we see in World War One. This is where this begins. As you said, it's the modern warfare, and Cold Harbor for Grant was something that he wrote in his memoirs. I have always regretted that the last assault of Cold Harbor was ever made. So he acknowledges as well.
He's certainly so. Finally, on June 12th, finally, Grant is going to decide it's time to move on. Again, he'd been the same game plan. His MO was to get around Lee's right, get behind him, force him out. He's going to do that again, and he's going to finally move out. And this is going to be the end of the Battle of Cold Harbor, and it's going to prove to be Lee's final battlefield victory in the American Civil War. Is what this is going to be. And Grant is going to famously head to Petersburg, and he's going to siege for the next 10 months, probably wondering what would have happened if he would have broken that line at Cold Harbor. Think about the lives that could have been saved. And you mentioned he regretted that.
Yeah.
He also goes on to say at Cold Harbor, no advantage whatsoever was gained to compensate for the heavy loss we sustained. It's the closest he gets in his memoirs to saying, I got my ass kicked.
Yeah.
And I regret it.
And he does.
And he does. One officer, he's going to write about the June 3rd attack. He says, the decisive action was over in just 8 minutes. That's how long this guy says it took. Colonel Charles Venable from Grant's staff wrote of that earlier proclamation that he was going to fight on the line all summer as long as it took. He says that seemed to be sicklied over the pale cast of light. So he's kind of chiding a little bit, saying, "Yeah, all summer my ass. We're not doing this."
Yeah.
In the end, the Battle of Cold Harbor is going to cost the United States 13,000 casualties, just 5,200 for the Confederacy. And that loss for Grant meant this war was going to continue for the next 10 months or longer. That's how it plays itself out.
And it does get into, as we know, not to spoil the surprise, it does get into a siege.
It does. It goes from there. But the thing about Cold Harbor, which is interesting too, is like a lot of the big boy battles, Gettysburg, and it's got Little Round Top, the Mule Shoe, the cornfield. This one doesn't have any of that. And it just doesn't have that location for the most part. But the thing about it, though, is what resonates in the mind of Civil War scholars is really the word Cold Harbor itself is the thing that resonates the most. And those are the ones, that word Cold Harbor, for a lot of these men, are going to be forever etched in their nightmares and prove that war really is hell. It really, really is.
Oh, yeah. No, that's true. It's horrific. As we said, like 1864, the war has definitely changed. even what it was in 1863. I mean, it's all horrific. All years of it are horrific. But 1864, you're seeing this more intense fighting. The trenches, the digging in, just this, you see it Eastern Theater, Western Theater. We saw it with Pickett's Mills, where the men were saying, it was the worst fighting they'd ever seen, and here they are, Eastern Theater, Cold Harbor, and they've already done Spotsylvania, and I bet they thought, wow, can't get any worse than this. It was like, well, here we are at Cold Harbor again, hand-to-hand combat. That's what Barlow's men are doing again.
It just, as you see the beginning of the war, you think about First Manassas, and you start to think about some of these battles and how it plays itself through. It's one of the things you can look at and really see how the beginning versus the end are almost completely different wars, where you go from that Napoleonic style right into the modern day warfare. And the Civil War is that bridge. And if you study Cold Harbor, it's a little misconception, a little bit, because the Rebs did lose a lot of guys too that Lee could not afford. Even losing, whatever it was, 5,000 guys. That's a lot for what Lee had at the time. He had no reserve line going into that battle. And so when he does get into Petersburg and he gets siege, you got some of the Fort Stedman, you got a couple of attempts to try to break through it, but he just didn't have the horses. And then when he makes his Appomattox run, you can just see the parts falling off the car as he's driving at this point. His army. So what Grant mentioned before, that he had Lee whipped, he kind of did, but Lee had one more fight in him. And Cold Harbor proved that Grant had a little more work to do. And a lot of people died for it, including a lot of Green troops who, for better or for worse, they did prove themselves in the field. But they paid a heavy price.
Yeah, it came at a cost. Came at a cost for sure.
Okay, so I think I would drop it off at that point. I think it's a good way to drop it. So Cold Harbor is a brutal battle to study from pure carnage. It just is. So what's coming up for us?
So our next episode in a few weeks is going to be we're finally doing an episode of Oliver Otis Howard. It's only taken us 111 episodes to do that, but we're going to be talking about Howard after Gettysburg, just because not a lot of people know much about his career after Gettysburg, what he did out in the Western Theater, probably touch a little bit on his work with the Freedmen's Bureau, and just what else he did with the founding of Howard University and being one of the founders of Lincoln Memorial University in Harrogate, Tennessee. So we're going to do that. We are going to be in Gettysburg for the 160th this year, so on July 1st at 4:30 p.m. Come out and join us at Spangler Farm for a private tour with thanks to the Gettysburg Foundation, and our friend Mark Blanchard is going to be giving that tour. And then at 7 o'clock on July the 1st, we're going to be meeting at Fourscore and just having a few drinks, probably talking about the Civil War.
Going back, the Spangler thing at 4:30 with Gettysburg Foundation is going to be great. There's no cost to this.
Yeah, it's
of
free.
Course, if you want to make a donation to the Gettysburg Foundation,
that's encouraged.
We don't take money here at the Old Civil War Breakfast Club.
No,
we
we're
don't.
Not.
So if you're going to donate some money, send it to Gettysburg Foundation. They are the straw that stirs the drink at Gettysburg, and we're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And then we'll have some fun with Fourscore and some other stuff going
on.
So that's going to be a great time.
We've got some other stuff going on that weekend too. We're probably going to do just some pop up Facebook lives from around the battlefield wherever we are. And all that. So that'll be good. And then once we get back from that, I'm sure we will be getting into some more episodes again, because we're in battle season. So we have battles to talk about.
So Oliver Otis Howard next. I'm going to have to turn the lights down low and has to get some mood music going in here. Maybe get something romantic in the background. Some song. Oh my God. I'm going to hose you down. That's going to be
right in the tub.
Right in the tub, exactly. All right, so we can drop it there on that note. But again, thanks for listening. We appreciate it. So
thank you, everybody.
Stay safe. It's definitely getting warm out there. No question about that. We will see hopefully as many of you as possible in Gettysburg. We look forward to hanging with as many people as we possibly can. Come check out the Spangler. Go online, check out the schedule for what's going on. I know there's a lot of cool stuff going on
in
Battlefield
town.
Trust. There's a thing if for people who have small kids. American Battlefield Trust with Gary Edelman is going to be doing something at the Lee headquarters on the 30th. I think it's 5 o'clock at night, 5:30. Go check that out. There's a lot of stuff going on. The reenactments taking place. The Daniel Lady Farm stuff's going on. Our friend MJ is going to be down there with her living history over Unity Park doing her thing. So if you're in Gettysburg, definitely check out as much as you possibly can. It's going to be a great time. There's going to be a lot of people down there. Bring your bug spray, Mary. Bring your tick spray.
Yep.
Bring your sun spray, and bring a lot of water, and bring your aspirin for those mornings afterwards. I'm afraid after those late nights at the Reliance Mine. So, all right, everybody, thanks for listening. We appreciate it. So, hopefully, we will talk to you all soon. So, Mary, the final words. Any words from you, Fincheru?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it like you always do, and thanks to all our listeners. And we will see y'all next time.
All right, guys. See y'all later.
Okay, bye, guys.
Peace out.